If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, follow, and rate on your preferred podcast platforms. If you'd like to reach out to me, simply connect to me on Twitter. Links in the description.
We can just accept the fact that, okay, in a couple of billion years, the sun is just going to expand and Earth will be incinerated, and we can be okay with that. Or we can understand the beauty of our intelligence and how unique understanding our surrounding is. That, hey, how many species have evolved enough to reach a point where they can question themselves and question their existence and how they formed in this universe, and then find ways to prolong their stay and explore further, see how vast this universe is, find out all those answers. Those are the things that will come from funding science.
This is Afshin Khan. She's a professional in the field of biotechnology, planetary, and space system science. She has led several space projects and also co founded a biotechnology startup. Today, as a postdoctorate fellow, she works on proteins that are responsible for DNA organization and their pathways. This might help us understand disease and prevent their progression. This kind of research is exciting because it might one day help us become a multi-planetary species. She has also worked previously at JPL and DLR. In this episode, we talk about microbiology and living in space. Here's my conversation with Afshin Khan. Your work is in a very important and yet innovative field and something that affects everyone on this planet. So, what were your early fascination with biology, drug development, life support, and planetary systems, and science in general? Who or what inspired you? Can you tell us how you got started in science?
Okay, so that's a very loaded question, and that basically means I'll have to tell you everything from when I was maybe 5 or 4 years old, or maybe younger, because I was inspired to go into science by mostly by everyone in my family, but my older brother, he was my I should say my idol growing up. As a child, I used to look up to him, and he's several years older than me. He was really good at math, and like kind of famous in his school for winning all these math awards. And he was studying to become an engineer. And in India, that was a huge thing. Coming from a middle class family, if you have someone who's studying to, go to IITs and one of these premier places, engineering colleges in India, that's a big deal. So it was my brother and my father and my father was very particular about all of us being good at math. And also my parents understood, they didn't speak English, but they understood the importance of knowing English, because for higher education, everything is medium of instruction in India is English, and when you go for jobs, etc. So they made sure that we as kids started picking these skills up early on. And it was challenging for them in many ways, but they, like my father had this rule at home when I was growing up, that I would have to wake up really early in the morning before I went to school, like maybe 5:30 or 6, and learn math tables, and also some spellings from my English literature books. So this was something I had to do every day. I used to hate doing it, but looking back, I am very thankful for these habits that my father instilled in me. And then of course I had a lot of help from my brother, because he was older and he was able to educate me, and I was just naturally gravitated towards natural things around me. I remember this funny thing that happened when Jurassic Park released. I was in grade 5 in school, and I watched the movie. This was over summer, and as you know, that summers in India, really, it's really hot. So for some reason, I was so fascinated by that movie. I just took a shovel and I started digging up the backyard, the garden, in the hope that if I dig deep enough, I may find some dinosaur bones there. and of course, my mother found me doing that. She was really angry. She was like, I was sitting out in the hot sun doing all this crazy stuff. And my brother, of course, made fun of me. But later, much later, he was at the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C., and he saw that they sell some kind of artificial dinosaur bones, and he called me up. At that time, I was in college, and he was like, "Hey, by the way, do you still want dinosaur bones?" Because he just remembered that small incident. And yeah, I used to play a lot by, like, I had friends, but I used to like playing by myself. And whenever I played alone, I was always pretending to be a scientist. I would just go collect samples in my parents' backyard, the garden. I don't know, I would just get leaves and dead insects and that sort of thing. And then I had this tiny corner in my mom's kitchen where I would collect empty bottles. And then for chemicals, since I didn't have access to chemicals, I would just mix up some spices with water to make them colored temporarily. And those were my chemicals. So, yeah, these were the things I was doing as a child. Now, when I think back about it, I'm like, okay, I got interested in science pretty early on. And space was fascinating to me mostly because of the night sky. You know, I've spent nights after nights when we in the summers when we would again sleep on the terrace, which is common practice in a lot of small towns in India. I would just spend a lot of time in the night when everyone else was asleep, just staring at the night sky, and I was so fascinated. I remember these stories my dad would tell me, and he was just making them up just to entertain a child, that there's probably people like us living in those distant star systems and planets, and maybe one day you can grow up and go find them. So this is him make, like, I'm talking about, say, early 19 late 1980s or early 1990s. He's making up stories to entertain a child. Imagine his shock and surprise when later on in life I joined a field called astrobiology, which is basically, to one of the questions that astrobiologists ask, is there life elsewhere in the universe? So yeah, I mean, that it was just very mind-boggling for my father that all of the stories he would make up is actually a field of study now. So that was my interest in space. But yeah, I was mostly encouraged. I was encouraged by my family to go towards medicine because my parents, and yeah, they just wanted me to do something meaningful for the world, and they thought that with their limited education and knowledge that they had, they thought, okay, doctors were the only people doing meaningful work, or like one of the few who did something to serve the society. They this mindset where they said, okay, no, you should be making the world a better place for people. So that's where, and they kind of understood that if you go into the sciences, you eventually end up, becoming a problem solver in the world. So that's where the scientific mindset was coming in. And if I went on to, I didn't go to med school, although my parents really wanted me to, but I took a biotech because that was an up and coming field of technology when I was about to go to college. And I thought it was fascinating. And since it was very biologically oriented. And with biotechnology, I saw you could also go into biomedical research. So I just, went for that. And in biotechnology, at least in India, the way the curriculum is designed, they teach you about all the aspects of biosciences. So you're not just learning microbiology, but you're also learning molecular biology, genetics, biochemistry, evolutionary biology. So these are all different specialties in biosciences, but you're cramming for all of these. Like, they pick upon and yeah, if they're not going into too much details in your bachelor's, that's something you pursue on later on in your postgraduate studies, which it makes sense. But yeah, in the bachelor's, they introduce you to all of these different aspects of biosciences and how it plays a role in developing technologies that uses microbiology. Excuse me. But in my second year in college, I used to read Scientific American. the magazine, which I know is not very popular with a lot of people. But for me, it was, it was a good thing, or a great thing back there, because there weren't a lot of scientific magazines. We had only a couple or so that were very popular, and Scientific American happened to be one of them in India. I read this article about, I remember it was the cover page. It was a picture of a bacteria or something, like an electron microscopic image, or whatever it was, done by an artist. And it said, "Are we living among alien cells?" And I was very fascinated. So I read that article, and it was all about astrobiology research and what was going on in some parts of the world at that time. So it was just, they had interviewed mostly astrobiologists in the US, maybe some in Australia. And I was hooked. I was fascinated, because I was like, so my background in biosciences and my love for space that I've had for a very long time as a child can actually be combined and be applied somewhere. All of this bioscience knowledge that I'm accumulating, it just doesn't have to be towards medicine. It can actually be applied towards, say, finding life elsewhere, or I don't know, helping humans survive on other planets or in space. So I was very, very fascinated. And I obviously, like, and nobody knew about this field in India back then. So I'm talking about the year, this may have been 2006, 2007ish. Okay, so no one really had an idea what this was. And I Google searched everything. India probably had some kind of workshops, maybe once a year, which was not certain. It used to happen somewhere in Mumbai. I talked to my professors, and yeah, they had no idea about what this field was. So I started reading a lot online. And luckily for me, NASA shares a lot of this information on their websites for free. It's just publicly available, what research is going on and what different people do, et cetera, et cetera. And back at that time, SETI, and SETI still has these. There's the SETI is search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The group, which used to be a part of NASA back then when I was exploring them, now they have separated and they're an independent entity. Although I know that most of their scientists are also NASA scientists. But it's just a funding thing. So anyway, SETI used to have these lectures online for free, and they would invite astrobiologists and planetary scientists to give talks and lectures on their research. So I used to listen to those and watch that online. And that was how I was learning more and more about what astrobiology was and what were the things going on, and basically answering my own questions, because like I said, nobody really knew what this was. And I wanted to introduce this to a larger audience. So I remember writing this article for my college magazine. The future is here with space biology, which is quite a dramatic title. But yeah, my friends liked it. And I basically talked about whatever I had learned from my online research. So, but then, yeah, it was something I didn't pursue after bachelor's immediately, because I didn't really know what to do. And I had seen there were some master's programs in Australia. But yeah, I didn't have, I didn't end up going there. I ended up moving to England for a more biotech focused field. And this was applied biomolecular technology again. It's a course designed for people if you want to go and work in the biotech sector, whether it's food, agriculture, or pharmaceuticals or biomedical research. So I just went for the master's, and I said, I want to learn more, because from my bachelor, I just had a very broad training, but I wasn't eligible enough to, become to hold a job. So I was like, okay, let's study further. In England, as I started to learn more, and I would listen to talks by visiting scientists and on some fascinating topics. Some of the things that were fascinating me at that time were crop science research, and how these different biotechnologies were helping people develop crops for arid areas, really dry areas where there was not enough water. And I would just ask these questions, throw these random questions at these scientists that, so if you, do you think we could use this technology to maybe someday grow crops on the moon? And they would be so they would just be so shocked, because again, astrobiology was not a thing in England either. Not a lot of people knew what this was. And it was still a very up and coming field and had not become very popular around the world everywhere. So they would be like, well, you would need, it depends. What is the moon's soil? Or now the right term, of course, is regolith. Soil, moon doesn't have soil because there's not been any organic activity like we have in Earth soil. But yeah, they would just try and think about the hypotheticals. What were the things that would be required, and what things were possible where we could actually apply biotech agriculture to growing crops on the moon. And say if you want to have a sustainable colony of a few astronauts going, or people going and living there, then potentially it's possible. So yeah, I would, it was just still a thought process for me. And then once I finished my master's, I got this internship in Germany to go and work at the European molecular biolabs. And there again, I was doing basic molecular science research, which was again more focused towards biomedicine. And people did not really know what astrobiology or any of that was. So while I was working, I knew somewhere in the back of my mind that I wanted to do a PhD. I knew that if you want to be a scientist, a well-rounded training requires you to have a PhD, and that's just how our the education system is set up. I'm not saying I completely agree with it, but it was just I knew that okay, if I wanted to advance in my career, I would need to have that PhD and have that capability of being able to do independent research and novel research. So doing a PhD, I knew it was a big decision because you must have that commitment to push through all difficulties and all challenges that will come to you as an independent researcher, because you're by yourself, you're developing a novel research, and you have some guidance from an advisor, of course, and a committee, etc. But to the most part, it's your independent thought process. So I really wanted to, because I had read about all these experiences from other people where people drop out of PhD, or they are going on for 10 years and they still don't have a PhD. And those were really scary stories to me. Of course, I also read about success stories, but I just wanted to, because I didn't have a lot of guidance elsewhere, since nobody in my family had done a PhD or even gone on to study that far in this field. Mostly people in my family were engineers, and they all had jobs after they finished their bachelor's. So it was challenging for me to find all of this information on my own. So I would talk to a lot of my professors and the people and the scientists I was working at EMBL and that sort of thing. So one of the advice I had gotten from a professor in England was only do a PhD in a topic you're absolutely in love with, because that love for that subject is what will help you survive your PhD. And I think that was great advice because that is why, while I was doing molecular science research, I could have chosen, like people in my position usually go on to choose fancy things in cancer research, or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, and some of these really badass biomedical research, like something really, really good. And I went the other way. I said, I really want to explore astrobiology, and I wonder if I can do a PhD in that. And astrobiology meant, astrobiology is a very interdisciplinary field. So if you're coming from a bioscience background, you will have to combine that, say, with either some kind of astrophysics research, or you'll have to combine that with like atmospheric research or oceans research or geology research, earth science research, basically, to answer important astrobiology questions. So that was my understanding. But I also knew that my background could be very useful in another narrow area of astrobiology, which was also to understand the future of human life in the universe, which is basically how will we survive on our planet sustainably, and how will we survive on other planets? If we are sending people out to Mars, how are we going to live there for long term? So that was another small aspect of astrobiology, or now as we know it, it's more a space biology thing. So I learned these differences later on. So that's when I made the transition. I applied for a PhD program in the US, and I came here to Washington State University. And my advisor was a geologist, but he would hire microbiologists and molecular biologists to work in his lab on different projects. The project I was given was actually very geology focused. And I had no background in geology except for the earth science and geography we study in high school. So I had up to that level of knowledge. But yeah, like if you want to do well in geology, if your understanding of physics and chemistry were good in high school, then you're good to go, because your fundamentals need to be clear. And that's how you understand rocks and what happens to rocks in different conditions. And, how, and when you're combining that with microbiology, how to do that interplay of sciences. So yeah, basically, if your fundamentals are clear in high school, then you're good to go. You can pursue anything you want in life, I think. So yeah, I ended up teaching geology for 8 years, and I finished my PhD, not in 8 years, much sooner. But I got hired after that for teaching geology at my university. And while I was doing astrobiology research, of course, I got a chance to go present and go and explore other projects that were happening in and around US and at NASA. Of course, working at NASA was a dream that I never really thought would come true. But I got a chance during my PhD to go and work at NASA Ames Research Center with a space biologist who was working on something very fascinating at that time. And that was a short internship of sorts. I was just a visiting scientist there. And then later on, again, last year, I was at NASA JPL where I did my postdoc. And so, yeah, that was just an unattainable dream that I had never even dreamed of. Like, I knew that NASA was this amazing place. But as a kid growing up, I had heard about stories from my dad again, how they sent people to the moon, and you had some of the best minds from the world working there. But I never thought I could, like, be at NASA. It was just a stepwise process that one thing led to another. I got fascinated with astrobiology, and then NASA happened to be the only place that had jobs related to astrobiology. Of course, universities have them too, but yeah, that's how I got a chance to get exposed and apply some of my training to that research. But while I was doing this, I am also interested, like I said, I'm also interested in the space biology aspect of how to help humans survive in space. And crop development was one of the aspects that I was looking at. I did dabble into it a little bit, but that's a research that needs to be taken up full time. And since things worked out differently for me in postdoc, I have moved more towards biomedical sciences now, but I know that biomedical sciences, or at least what I'm studying, is currently very, very important to NASA's goals, or to space goals, not just NASA, any space agency's goals for sending humans into space in the future. So we are still trying to understand what happens to the human body in long-term space missions. And some of the recent research is showing what are some of as the biotech or the biomedical field develops with its technology, we are starting to gain a better understanding of what are the different biochemical factors that are changing in a human body in long-term missions. And I feel like even if I'm working at a clinic right now, these are applications that could potentially be very useful for space in the future. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm studying disease progression at Cleveland Clinic, and I'm studying the DNA repair mechanism, which is really important. So I work in the department of inflammation and immunity, and so it's kind of immunology, where we understand how after a bacterial or a viral infection, or in diseases and in chronic diseases, how does the body repair itself? How does the DNA repair itself? What are the mechanisms involved in there? What are the pathways, excuse me, that are involved that we have to exploit either with therapeutics or pharmaceuticals and whatnot to prolong lifespan or to cure diseases, that sort of thing. I know that all of these will have applications or have applications in space biology too, except that places to do that where you are just doing it because you only have astronauts going up in space only once in a while. So places where you can do this directly right now are very few. And therefore, a better way to train for these things and understanding the basic science behind it is if you work in the biomedical sector. And so, yeah, that's how I am where I am right now.
Uh, That's a really inspiring story. Those early curiosities really latch on, and you talked a lot about combining your multiple interests and then finding this field that's almost perfect for you, which is always nice because people tend to have interest in several fields, and yeah,
And I
astrobiology.
did too. I just wanted to mention that I never really had a clear idea of what I wanted to be when I was, when I was older or whatever. I think I still don't. I'm still evolving. So I often when I talk to my students, they would feel very like I felt as an undergrad or even as a postgrad at master's level. They felt lost because they said, we have so many interests. I don't know how to bring it together. And that was me. I had so many interests. I had no idea how to bring it together. And I just went on this whim of whatever I felt most strongly about. And I had some skills and training to show for it because, we cannot really go up and say, okay, I feel really, really strongly about this. I could say, I want to be a F1 driver. I feel really strongly about this. I love Ferraris, but I know nothing about speed car racing. So I don't have any skills to show for it. So when I say that, okay, if you feel very strongly about something, also have some skills and some background training to show for it. And adventurous to see where life takes you. If you have some of those core things, like some of the things that I talked about, like the values that our parents instill in us, okay, do good for the world. Whatever you do, make sure that you're not doing something that's destroying the planet or destroying people's lives, that sort of thing. Uh, yeah. So.
Uh, you have several years of experience in planetary science, drug development, etc. Can you talk about what is the most groundbreaking technology that is currently being developed in these fields that you've worked on? What is the latest technology, or uh, what is currently what can we see in the next few years in astrobiology or drug development?
So combining drug development with space sciences, the brief experience I had at NASA Ames. So this is what the technology was where I worked with. The scientist there, he and a few others in the world are working towards this hypometabolic state where you can put astronauts or people who are sent to long-term space missions in this hypometabolic sleep. It's kind of like a, a cryogenic sleep, and I don't know when it's fully developed what the exact features are going to be, because different people are exploring different aspects of that. And then one company in Atlanta, Georgia here, they actually got NASA's Innovative Advanced Concepts grant to develop this technology for NASA's missions in the future. And this is for long haul missions. So if you remember the movie Interstellar,
Yeah, I think everybody.
yeah. Okay. Yes. No one can forget that movie.
Yeah.
Yes. So you watched how astronauts, they were being sent to these different far off star systems, and sure, their space travel technology was far more advanced. They could create wormholes and go through it, whatnot. We don't have that yet. But even sending people to Mars, say on a 6 months mission, is a pretty expensive mission. You need to fill up that rocket that they're going to be traveling in with a lot of food materials, because human body needs food consumptions. And then, not to mention, when you land on another planet, you need another of that resupply mission coming in with food stuff. So this is one of the reasons why it's so challenging to have people in space for a long time, because the space that we send stuff in is so limited. And but the human body needs all of that. This is all essential stuff, which is why JPL chooses to do robotic exploration. You don't need to send food to robots, to rovers. You could have a battery pack, you could have solar panels, and that's their food. So one of the technologies NASA is very interested in, and that's something I'm excited to see in the next few years, is this hypometabolic state that astronauts can be put in, where your body basically goes into a slow metabolic rate. It's kind of like what, say, bears do when they hibernate in the winter. So they have large heavy meals before they go into hibernation, and then their metabolic rate kind of slows down when they sleep through the winter, or when they sleep through their hibernation states. And a lot of other organisms, living organisms, show this, especially bacteria being on top of the list. Not that we'll ever be able to mimic the wonderful things bacteria do, because we are just so different and complex. But there are so many bacteria, especially cyanobacteria, that have survived through the centuries, or through the entire evolutionary history of Earth, because some of them were able to go into this hypometabolic state or sleep, where they do not metabolize, they do not divide, or let's say, you know, proliferate. So because of that, when conditions are not favorable to them, they just go into this deep sleep. And then when conditions are right, they basically start metabolizing again. They start living and thriving again, and reproducing again. So that's a very fascinating thing in life sciences. And of course, it's a lesson for space travel, that if we can put humans into this cryogenic sleep, where they do not need a lot of nutrients to say survive 6 months for that journey to Mars, then that saves a lot of space for supplies for when you land on Mars. So I don't know if this, at least that's what NASA's hope is, that this technology is ready and fully developed with no consequences, uh, ready to go when they have the first human missions ready to go. I don't know, but it is currently in development. And that's all I can say, because when I worked on this, I was also exploring what applications does this technology have towards, say, biomedical sciences. So I was exploring a couple of hospitals. The same, it's basically a combination of drugs that you can give to a person and then bring them into this deep sleep state. Although at NASA, the scientists had only tested this in mice, and then he was testing what was the brain activity recovery after you wake these mice up from the deep sleep. But in hospitals, they are trying to explore this, especially for trauma patients from accidents, or some really severe injury where they undergo surgery and their organs have to be saved. So one of the ways to save people's lives in such conditions can be to put them through this cryogenic sleep, where the metabolic rate slows down. And then during the surgery, the doctors are able to do whatever they have to do to put the person back together and save their life. So if the metabolic activity is slowed down, then that saves a lot of the degradation that happens in that time while the surgery is taking place. So that was something that was being explored. I haven't looked into it in a while, but I've been following this company in Atlanta to see what they come up with. Obviously, because it's a company and they are developing patents, so they are very secretive about it. They only share limited information at this time. But I know that they have the phase 2 of the NASA, this is another very coveted NASA grant that people go after when they are developing groundbreaking technology. And they're on phase 2 of that. So they must be making progress for this cryogenic sleep for astronauts.
Yeah, the whole hibernation concept is, I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds all science fiction, but like you mentioned, we see it in nature with bears and other animals, so which is
Yeah.
pretty cool. Is this something that are the drugs being developed through, or are they based on stem cells from those animals, or do you know about how the science works in that?
So no, they have not been derived from stem cells of animals or anything. These are just, yeah, different pharmaceutical drugs or different the chemical that was discovered that can potentially induce a cryogenic state in mammals. So that's what is being tested and then of course there are several other technology aspects to it that goes into cooling down the body, but then keeping it alive as well at the same time. And like I said, more aspects of that is being developed by this company, so I am not aware of all the details associated with it, but that it would be probably be very similar to what is done in trauma surgery in some hospitals and places.
Can you talk about what microbiomes are? To me, it sounds like an entire micro civilization that is, involved in converting resources into energy and byproducts, which are in turn used by other civilization for their energy needs in a way, which is quite fascinating. So what are microbiomes, and why is it necessary to understand the ecosystem of microbial life?
That's because everything on Earth is so interconnected. When I think previously when we used to think of stuff, we just thought, okay, things are very isolated. Okay, if I'm trying to understand this one aspect of the human body, I just need to understand how this works, like how the lungs work or how the heart works and how the stomach works. But we are learning to see how interconnected those things are, and you can like literally take that medical example and apply it anywhere. Where when people were trying to understand the climate, they just thought, okay, one aspect, how much radiation we receive from the sun, how much energy we receive from the sun is probably playing the biggest factor. And we fail to understand, probably in previous times, how the different other ecosystems, how the ocean system actually affects our climate, and how warming up the oceans is a bad idea. So all of this, of course, has been in slow development. And as we know now, standing in like the 21st century, in the year 2021, we can hardly say that systems are isolated. Systems are always communicating with each other, and that's what our ecosystem is. So microbiome, yes, they play a very important role, whether it is in the soil or whether it's on our skin or inside of our gut. So the microbiome, at least in medical sciences, became a big thing. And actually, it was one of the labs that I worked next door to at EMBL that came out almost more than 10 years now. This was 2010 when the paper went out. This was a huge Nature publication on the human microbiome and its effects and how it affects human health. So back then, this lab, so EMBL is a pretty big organization and you have different labs working there. So I remember in the computational biology unit, Dr. Peter Bork's group was involved. And when this paper came out, they had news reporters come in there. And I was just curious. I was like, okay, what is going on? So yeah, this is the paper that came out, and they're becoming super famous about it. But later on, I realized the importance of that. I was like, oh my gosh, I was probably in the presence of celebrities of microbiomes. But yeah, it was fascinating to understand, or as we are learning more and more, how the human gut microbiome plays a huge role in the development, in the control, and in our day-to-day activities, in the control of diseases, how disease develops in different people, how the disease is cured in different people, probably. and how just in our day-to-day lives, what we eat, how it affects us on a long-term basis. All of these decisions seems to be being made by the bacteria that live in our gut. And it's very fascinating that some of the most of these bacteria are good bacteria. We definitely want them, and I feel like a lot of people are not aware, but we have all kinds of microbiome all over us. The human body is covered in microbiomes, both inside and outside. So our skin has its own microbiome. So it has all of these good bacteria that take care and make sure that the skin is functioning properly, or if you have any toxic substances lying around, they are able to degrade that. Now that doesn't mean that, if people are exposed to toxic chemicals, they should not wash themselves or take a shower. That is absolutely necessary. You cannot just depend on bacteria, but our day-to-day healthy living is so dependent on these bacteria. Then our mouth has its own microbiome, and you want it to be in a healthy balance, because when that goes out of balance, it leads to periodontal disease and the bacteria that eat away into your jawbone, which is not a good thing. That's why your teeth started to loosen up, and people start to lose teeth much early in their life, or you start to see those gaps in your gums. So that's because of the mouth microbiome being out of balance, and it leads to other diseases. So the mouth microbiome is actually so fascinating that the toxic substances, like say if it's out of balance, which means you have a lot of unhealthy bacteria growing in there, or any kind of fungus growing in the microbiome, it would metabolize and it would release these toxic chemicals that eventually just go down. It goes down your throat into your gut, and it's not good for you. So it can lead to, people are trying to study what are the diseases associated with the mouth microbiome being out of balance. And these are long-term diseases. Like, these people don't find out. Maybe the mouth microbiome went out of balance when a person was 25, and the disease doesn't show up until that person is 60 years old. So that's how complex and interesting and important these studies are, because if you can maintain a healthy mouth microbiome when we are younger, then okay, we don't have to worry about certain things when we are older. So that's related to the human body. Now, coming to environmental sciences, the soil microbiome is very important for keeping the soil active and healthy for agriculture. Now, if the root microbiome goes out of balance, when you have pathogenesis developing, that means the plants are dying, or there's some kind of a disease fungus that's taking over. So that's the microbiome of the soil. Now, these microbiomes are, again, not present on another planet. At least we haven't discovered it, because if they are devoid of any bacteria or archaea, or any kind of microbial life, they don't have a microbiome. So microbiome is just the microbiology or the microbial life that is required for the healthy functioning of any system. That's, I guess, I hope I just invented that definition, and I hope I got all the aspects of it. So yeah, it's just the microbial life that we are so dependent on. So I used to tell my students, I was teaching this one class at Washington State. It's called the Earth's Evolution and History, which is a combination of the Earth's geological history and the biological history of how life evolved. So I used to tell them that anytime anybody says that geology or the earth has evolved independently and the geology is very independent, it's not dependent on life, that is not true. Don't listen to that person, because earth's life, really, earth's geology has been impacted so much by earth's life. And even if the first couple of billion years were just it was just microbiology, they have played such a huge role in all of the oxygen that we have today. They've played such a huge role in how the rocky material has been broken down and become abundant, so that, or become so that there were plants that were able to grow on land. And then, we had this huge forests going in before humans even came along. So all of this was done by bacteria. So do not ever underestimate bacteria. In my opinion, they are probably the smartest organisms, even though they are just single cellular prokaryotes. And yeah, I think in astrobiology or in search for extraterrestrial intelligence, scientists can argue what sentinel intelligence is. And yes, humans are the most smartest, but I find that questionable. I feel like you should really give more credit to bacteria and plants, because they can make their own food. They literally just need water and sunlight. So I once got into an argument in my astrobiology class when I was a student. And I told my professor, the day we can synthesize our own food with just sunlight and water, talk to me that day about intelligence. Because because I was just trying to make an argument that plants should be given more credit for intelligence because of the way they are, because of the way the network works and how they make this planet more breathable and livable. So, and so same as microbiome. So yes, like I said, going back to your original question, this is what microbiomes are. And then developing another planet, if you like, I think the more popular term is terraformation, but really terraformation is making another planet Earth-like. That's something that we may not be able to achieve. Like even if we are trying to call it have people on Mars, uh, we may not be able to make it look like Earth, because Earth is a result of 4 billion years of evolution, where all of these different systems, starting with the microbiome and the climate and how it interacted with all the other organisms that developed and evolved, that has made Earth livable for humans today. But if we are trying to send complex, already evolved humans to another planet that does not even have any microbiome, likely, maybe in the past, there, and that's what the new Perseverance rover is going to look for. It's looking for microfossils that could have been formed by extinct bacteria that may have lived on Mars, or even if there is any bacteria, it's probably way deep in the soil, or I don't know, in protected environments like caves. We'll see, eventually, if we discover it, we'll find out. We definitely know there's no complex life, at least nothing on the surface. We know that. So when we are trying to set up colonies on the moon or Mars, microbiome, at least the soil microbiome, will play a huge role in making, say, if you want to use the local regolith to grow food there, then yes, that's where the microbiome will come in and play a role, where you would need to carry some vials of healthy earth bacteria to make the regolith viable enough. And of course, with other organic materials that goes into it.
You talked quite a bit about how many of the microbiomes of planet Earth are quite balanced and interconnected. Uh, does this make studying these microbiomes difficult? Uh, I mean, whether in research or at work, how do you go about isolating and experimenting on a specific microbiome? Uh,
So microbiome, when I say so, it's going to be a community of hundreds to 200s or more kinds of bacteria that's present in an environment, and then how they interact with each other. So usually when we talk about microbiome, we start with metagenomic analysis. Metagenomic analysis means looking at all of the bacteria that are present in a specific sample. So for my PhD, for example, I studied a natural asphalt lake. Asphalt is that substance that may have seen when they make roads, they make asphalt, the blackish, oilish substance, crude oil. But we have like about 3 natural asphalt lakes around the world, 3 or 4, not more than that. They're more like, some of them, at least one of them off the shore of California, that's more like a tar pit. But yeah, I was studying this lake, which is based in Trinidad, in the Caribbean area, and it's a natural asphalt lake. And you wouldn't expect to find anything in an asphalt lake. It's super oily. There's very little water activity, and it's gooey. So a person, if you is exposed, if one on the first look, when you look at it, even as a biologist, you wouldn't really think that that would have any kind of life form in it or would have any bacteria in it. But fascinating enough, they were able to discover. Actually, my PhD advisor, Dr. Dirk Schulze Maku, he's based in Germany now. when he was at Washington State, he was working with a team, and they discovered a huge community of bacteria and archaea in this lake. And so, yeah, my job, or at least my part of the project, was isolating some of them, some of the interesting species that were in there, and then, of course, studying the geochemical aspects of it and how this lake existed where it was, trying to piece that together as well. So the way the way they had analyzed it was to get samples from this lake, and then just make it undergo the processing that's required for sequencing. So metagenome sequencing is basically will give you the sequences of everything that is present in a community. And that is how it's done for other environments as well. Say, for example, the soil microbiome. Depending on how far you want to go away from plants, people take samples from there. And then, of course, the cleanup process is required just to isolate the bacteria that's going. And oftentimes people culture them in the lab. They try to culture them in cleaner agar plates or whatever media that's required. If not, then they just get it from the environment as is and send it for sequencing. So it always starts with metagenome sequencing, and then depending on what your science questions are, people go for various analysis where they may want a deep sequencing or a whole genome sequencing of some of the more interesting species that you may be seeing in that entire community. Another example I can give you is when I studied the spacecraft assembly clean room bacteria at JPL. And this was fascinating because a lot of people don't think about what is spacecraft assembly microbiome. Why is that even important to study? So this is what I was looking at. I was studying, when they put the rovers together at JPL. So you may have seen pictures or you may have seen videos where the engineers, they wear clean suits, like they are covered up from head to toe completely. And you have to be gloved and you have to wear those white suits. And the reason for that is because we don't want any shedding from the human skin, which will contain a lot of bacteria from humans. And then, wherever you're coming from, if you're coming from outside, a lot of soil bacteria that may have come along with you. We don't want anything in the vehicle assembly room. And these are the clean suits or clean room suits that people have to wear in clean rooms everywhere, like in operation theaters, in pharmaceuticals where the medicines are made, because you don't want contaminants. Contaminants means all the virus and bacteria that may be coming in with the person into that clean room. So that's why they have to undergo that cleaning process before they enter these clean rooms. So why do we isolate? So yes, in spite of all of the precautions, you do have some bacteria that reach the clean room surface or when the rovers are being built. And that's why they have to be swabbed, and samples have to be taken constantly. And then we keep a record of all of the bacteria that are being isolated from the vehicle assembly room at NASA. And the reason for that is before a rover is launched, NASA has to comply with this international treaty that was set up among all the spacefaring nations, where we don't want to forward contaminate any planet while we explore them and look for life. So why is that important? Because at first you may think, why do we care? So this is why we care. We are still trying to understand planets in their form as is. But we also know wherever humans go, we take a lot of bacteria and dirt with us, and we contaminate everywhere we go. So if we find something unique, we want to make sure that that uniqueness is coming from that planet or planetary body, and it's not something that humans brought as contamination. And even if we haven't gone anywhere, we haven't gone to another planet, okay, we've only been as far as the moon, but we have sent rovers there, and those rovers were built by humans, which means we have to make sure that whatever shedding, whatever bacteria was taken, whatever may have, come to stick on the surface of these metals, have been cleaned as much as possible. And if anything may have escaped, then at least we know what those were, and we have a database of all of the bacteria that were isolated from these clean rooms. So that in the future, when we have, say, a sample return from Perseverance, or the next rover that will go after Perseverance and will bring back a Martian samples, anything, any bacteria that we see, we will have to be sure that it was not something that was sent from Earth. You see what I mean? Because it could have hitched a ride on Perseverance. So we want to be sure about that. And that's why we study the microbiome of spacecraft assembly. And when I say microbiome, really it's just all the bacteria, possible bacteria that we see in an ideal setting like a spacecraft assembly room. So we have a pretty good idea about what are the regular genus of bacteria that we see. So I was, with my data sets, I was mostly just looking at Bacillus, a lot of them. Very a few times when you find something, when we send them for sequencing, and we think it's an interesting candidate, that's when we choose those candidates to say, let's say, get a whole genome sequencing and try and understand its what will it metabolize and how will it interact and how does it survive in, say, excuse me, extreme heat or extreme cold conditions, because is it able, will it be able to survive the journey between Earth to Mars, even if you have a few of it sticking on the rover. So those were the kind of interesting questions that planetary protection tries to answer. So that's why NASA has this section, and every NASA center has this planetary protection section associated with it if they are building spacecraft assembly, or if they're doing any kind of rocket assembly and that sort of thing, or building rovers that will be sent to other planets for exploration, where planetary protection engineers and scientists make sure that we are compliant and we are not forward contaminating other planets. So it becomes really important that way.
You mentioned a few supporting points on this, and this may be a bit off topic, but how do you respond to questions like why are we investing billions each year to study about space, or setting up base on the on moon or on the moon or Mars, and working on the ISS? I mean, there's a lot of spin-offs and a lot of technology that gets transferred into helping people on planet Earth. But how do you respond to a similar question? If
So
you
when those
answer.
questions come in, I have a very simple answer. That's because people do not know how funding works at NASA. So it's only, I think it's about 8 cents to a dollar of taxpayers' money, or maybe less, that goes towards NASA. So if that small tiny amount is going to NASA and they're able to do such amazing things, I feel like NASA is underpaid. Because if you compare the planetary science budget to some of the budget of military applications, which may or may not be necessary. It depends. It's debatable. In America, it's a sensitive topic. I mean, yes, you need military operations to keep the country safe. I think every country needs that. But do you need that excessive budget for doing things that are completely unnecessary? And this may be true in context if we are talking in the US. United States military operations are way vast than any other countries in the world. So I feel like it's really important. Yes, you should have a strong military, but a lot of that money could go into, I don't know, curing diseases and giving it to planetary scientists to understand our nature in the universe, because these are the fields of science that will prolong humanity's stay in the universe. Otherwise we can just accept the fact that, okay, in a couple of billion years the sun is just going to expand and Earth will be incinerated, and we can be okay with that. Or we can understand the beauty of our intelligence and how unique understanding our surrounding is, that hey, how many species have evolved enough to reach a point where they can question themselves and question their existence and how they formed in this universe, and then find ways to prolong their stay and explore further, see how vast this universe is, find out all those answers. Those are the things that will come from funding science. So planetary science, like any scientific field, I feel it's very underfunded. So when you see these price tags for rovers from NASA that, okay, this cost this much, just a blown up number that is money that's come over several years from a very extremely small percentage of taxpayers' money. Really, if they were given more than what is allocated to NASA currently, they'd be able to probably be able to set up Mars bases by now, I feel. But yeah, it's like with the limited funding, they are able to at least do robotic exploration, which is still really great. We've been able to explore as far as Pluto with these by sending exploring spacecrafts all the way up to the edge of the solar system. So it's really not that expensive. And yes, when you think about space companies, and that's just because space companies, if you their goal, at least for SpaceX, their goal is to set up a Mars base for humans permanently, and be that provider for cargo ship delivery, and have those vehicles to transport goods and people back and forth from Mars. So that's their only goal, and that's the reason why they've been set up. So I mean, we can't really question if somebody wants to start a company to send people to space. It's just like if somebody wants to start a company to cure cancer. It's because they are motivated towards it. So a person could have different motivations for setting up these different companies. We can't question that. Um, and for as far as exploration is concerned, spending, yes, they are spending a lot of money to make these rovers to explore and understand, because it's really important for the future of humanity. And we have to understand that it's not always that just focusing all our money towards curing all diseases that will save humanity. Eventually, even if we are cured of all diseases, we could have an asteroid strike our planet and everything could just be over, in a matter of seconds. So, what tells us that an asteroid is coming towards our Earth? That is investing in space, investing in telescopes and investing in all these interesting technologies. Because I would say the difference between us and dinosaurs is that they did not have a space program. But dinosaurs once roamed the earth for many millions of years, high and mighty. They were the most strongest, organisms or creatures of this planet. But they didn't see an asteroid coming, or they didn't see that there was going to be a hotspot volcanic eruption uh, down by India that would lead to the change in climatic conditions. So this is why we invest in all fields of sciences, because all fields of sciences are necessary to keep this planet going. And it's not just investing a lot in one aspect of science. You have to have an overview effect, or like be able to look at Earth as a system. So it's very important to invest in all of these fields.
Yeah, beautifully put. I completely agree. The saying of dinosaurs went extinct because they didn't have a space program is it's completely true almost.
Yeah, I
Uh,
said it in a conference once, and yeah, that made my audience laugh because it's true. Yeah, that's the big difference. They were ruling the planet just as we are today, but we also have a space program, and that just might save us from becoming extinct.
you talked a bit about planetary ecosystems, but I want to know about in orbit ecosystems, for example, at ISS or future space hotels. Uh, is it possible to have a self sustaining with minimum supplies to in orbit stations?
Maybe in the future, but when it starts, we will be very dependent on resupply missions from the planet, and which is why you see a lot of these rocket companies cropping up, where they are trying to bring down the cost of launch to orbit. And one of the reasons is because they want to make these ecosystems, or have these space hotels, or in like a lab like International Space Station is, in orbit, where we can understand more about our survival in space. and answer some of those questions for, excuse me, deeper space exploration for the future. So yeah, initially when they are set up, it may not be completely self-sustaining, although the goal is that. I did explore for a while when I was at Washington State. We did this experiment to do a autonomous germination in orbit of some pea seeds, because it's just protein rich, and we wanted to demonstrate that we can have, say in the future, you can have greenhouses that are completely autonomous and can grow crops. And it seems like a lot of companies are looking towards this. Different people are looking towards this, how to make it feasible, economically feasible, because yeah, you may have amazing scientific ideas and engineering plan, but it also needs to have a viable business plan. How will you get this funded, and how will you get the money and make it business ready such that there's gains from it? Like, I mean, why would anyone invest money in something if they are not going to get any returns? So people are trying and working on this from various angles to have self-sustaining agriculture. Like right now, you may know ISS has some salad material growing, but salad will not sustain human activity because of all the hard work astronauts do up there. They are still dependent on frozen food from which is sent in resupply missions, either from the Soyuz or from SpaceX. That there's regular launches that take place to the ISS, and most of it almost always had food resupply for astronauts living up there. So they are trying to do these experiments, yes, because eventually NASA and every other space agency that's involved in the ISS would like to have self-sustaining agriculture, but it's going to take a while. Like even maintaining all of that, and the way plants grow in the absence of gravity, making sure that it's still viable and healthy crops, the weight of everything we have to consider, and then how are we keeping them alive? Like, water systems. You need water, or you need nutrients. If not water, you need at least nutrients to keep enough plants growing to that can sustain even 6 astronauts on the International Space Station. So all of the logistics of all of these things is difficult and it's complicated. So this is why several people are working on it, but it will take time until we reach the point where we can say we don't need anything from Earth anymore. We are growing everything in space. Because it's not just one aspect. Like when I started to think about it, I got a broader view that it's not just agriculture or biotech innovations that are required. You also need rocket costs, or the cost of launching things to space, to become cheaper. You also need so many other things to happen at the same time, so that it, like I said, it comes back to that initial thought: everything is so interconnected. So you need all of these different aspects to work out before we can have greenhouses growing in the lower Earth orbit, growing plants in their lower Earth orbit.
Uh, the Artemis program, it's mind blowing that it's even real, and the hardware is being developed right now.
Yes.
Uh, we'll see the first woman to land on the moon, learn to build habitats on the surface, maybe even
Yes.
grow plants, and learn how to use resources from the surface. What are your thoughts on the Artemis program, and do you think it's a good strategy to go to the moon first and then learn from those experiences and
For
then plan on?
Mars,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And our Themis program is kind of inspired a lot by originally what they had in mind after Apollo. So, from what I have learned from my conversations and reading some of the older books around the Apollo program, that NASA did have plans to send humans to Mars eventually after Apollo, but it was a very politicized endeavor and not a scientific endeavor back then. And therefore, even though as much as NASA wanted, they were not funded further to be able to develop their technologies or their steps towards Mars. So I think that it's great that Artemis is funded now, and it's a stepwise process, but that's how NASA does things. It always does things. Uh, they don't claim, okay, now we are going to send humans to Jupiter. they won't make those tall claims. Okay, yeah, we're going to go land on Mars, but it has to be a stepwise process. You start with the first small step. We are going to start sending people to the lower Earth orbit, and then we go and see if we can have small habitats on the moon, and then we go to the next step to Mars. And I feel like that's just the scientific process or the scientific mechanism at work, where you do things and plan things in small incremental steps so that you can learn and take the next larger step in a bolder way, in a bigger way, in a better way. Rather than trying to put together a mission to go really far out into space and then everything just gets blown up in your face. We cannot afford to lose human lives like that. So I am really hopeful for the Artemis programs to give us great answers for what will be required for people when they set up a base on Mars, because we've really not had that before. I mean, sure, we've had people living in the lower Earth orbit, but it's not the same as living on another planetary body, which is so many more million miles away. And it's a to be honest, it's a scary thought that think about all the things that could go wrong technology wise, and then you just had these few brave people who gave up their lives for nothing. So they don't want those, they don't want martyrdom in space. They want to be scientists, they want engineers, they want engineering solutions in space, and they want explorers in space. So to do that, Artemis missions will be enabling us with a lot of the technology that could potentially be applied towards Mars bases in the future.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Personally, it's I never had the Apollo moment like most people say. So it's our generation's new program, which is quite
Yeah.
exciting. Uh, so, say you're one of the scientists on the Artemis program. What kind of research and experiments would you be interested in performing in orbit or on the surface of Moon? And let's say there's no budget or any other constraints. So if you like to do something fun like building the classical volcano experiments, you're free to do that.
Right. So, with my background and training, I would mostly be interested in two different aspects. One is, of course, the environmental aspect of in situ resource utilization. How can we use the resources on the moon? And the specific application for that would be, how can we grow crops in moon regolith? We have these small scale experiments that we've done on Earth, but really on the moon it will be serious stuff. So say if I could get an entire habitat to just grow crops and keep it going for 4 or 6 astronauts, that would be something that I would be really interested in doing. And then the other aspect is, of course, the biomedical aspect. What is happening to the human body when they are living on the moon with smaller gravity, sometimes exposed to radiation? Of course, their spacesuit protects them for most parts, but say if any radiation exposure is there, what sort of mechanisms are taking place, and what can we do with our current medical technologies to help in the DNA repair of these astronauts? And then some of the other questions are more long term, that okay, once they return, then what happened to them, and are there any say and it's really hard to assess, if there's going to be any kind of cancer development in the future. That those are the things we are trying to avoid. It's better to be avoided than to then screen astronauts to answer those questions. It just becomes very complicated. But yeah, those two things, the bodies, the changes that the body undergoes, human body undergoes in a moon environment, and then being able to grow food, are two of my favorite technology development areas for the moon and for Mars, for both of these.
Uh, yeah, continuing with the concept of growing plants on the surface of Moon, can you talk about the first or the early steps of growing food on, say, the surface of Mars? What kind of biological processes are necessary to sustain plant growth, and what kind of equipment and hardware would be required?
Okay, so so one aspect would be crop selection, And like you may have seen, they have tomatoes and they have lettuce growing on the ISS. But really, those are not some of the things that we like, at least my colleagues and I think about who are working in this field, is we need to grow energy dense food. Something that gives you more energy should be protein rich, ideally fiber, that would be very helpful. Because even though tomatoes and spinach, yes, those are really, or lettuce, they are really healthy additions to your meal, you cannot sustain on them. You know what I mean? Yeah, like you need, whether you're eating a vegetarian diet or not, it needs to be energy dense. So we need high protein diet. And so I would be very interested, and I think it's going in that direction, at least for NASA, where they are looking into things like chickpeas and lentils and that sort of those sort of crops, where uh, you can actually get viable crops for providing energy and for providing nutrition. But then the other challenges that they're looking at is that if you have a restricted area, then it needs to be crop that will require not a lot of post processing, after it's harvested, such that it is ready to go to be eaten or to be consumed by humans after not a ton of processing. Because we tend to take agriculture or farmers for granted, but they do a lot of hard work after any crop is harvested. And by the time it reaches our table, there's so many steps involved. And one of the challenges to do that in space or on another planet is, how do you reduce the number of steps post harvest to consumption? Like, after you pick something out of the plant or the tree or whatever is growing, and how ready is it to be consumed after that? Like, do you just have to wash it, or does it have to go under several steps of processing? So those are the challenges that they are trying to solve right now. Another thing is how can you create these greenhouses to be automated, such that it can be taken care of? Because astronauts, if you're on another planet and you've been sent on exploratory missions, you will have a ton of other things going on, such that if you're just tending to agriculture, just trying to grow your food, it may take up all your day just tending to that. And then, you may be there for like a year or year and a half mission, where 80% of your time went into keeping yourself alive. So that would not be a great mission. So another technology aspect that different universities and companies or NASA centers, excuse me. So yeah, that's one of the other technology aspects that they're looking at, is how do you have autonomy in greenhouses, and where will the water come from? That's another question that they've been trying to ask. That, okay, if we are going to set up greenhouses, that's going to require some water to keep the plants growing. And even if we have plants that require very little amount of water, that's great. We definitely want those crops, but we will still need water. So having that resource or creating that infrastructure for utilizing resources on either the moon or Mars to have these aspects of the habitat going are the current challenges that different people are looking at.
Uh, are there alternative research, or not really research? Are there alternative methods? For example, we have cultured meat, which is based off stem cells. So, is there
Yeah.
a way to completely, not completely, at least to some extent, uh, remove growing plants, which requires a lot of resources and nourished soil? Is there a way to overcome that and then use some?
So yeah, so yeah, all of those technologies are important, and I know that NASA Houston has a center that focuses on some of these food technologies. And even if it's cultured meat or cultured whatever, just having one type of diet is not healthy. We definitely need a mix of plant-based diet, or even if it's cultured meat, because you won't be able to get meats that's coming from an animal source, because that would be a very expensive uh, send off to another planet. I mean, cargo. Eventually, yes. I mean, that's how frozen food travels, and they are developing their frozen food technology as well, like that makes food more shelf stable for longer, and that applies to all kinds of foods. That is now sent to the ISS also. But yes, cultured meat is one of the technologies that people have proposed that could be very useful for feeding a large number of people in, say, in space or on other planets if they're living for a long time. That's a very interesting technology, but I don't know if NASA centers itself are looking into it. I know that they give funds, like NASA has all these solicitations for universities and companies who are developing technologies that is useful to them. They do fund this, and they may have funded a couple or two startups in that area too, for developing this. So yeah, these are all of these interesting alternative technologies. They all provide or lend towards solutions that are being developed towards a future habitat for humans on the moon and on Mars, for sure.
Uh, this may be a bit far into the future, but how do we go from those early steps and into a completely self-sustained process? There's, like you talked about, involves everything from the soil and the atmosphere of, say, Mars. And is this even possible? Because we're talking about changes at a planetary scale. Uh,
So it will be a stepwise process, like with all things, space. It will be a small stepwise. So right now, one of the interesting instruments on Perseverance is Moxie, and that's an example of an in situ resource utilization. What Moxie is basically doing is capturing the CO2 in Mars environment. I think it's yet to perform its functions. I mean, whenever that is scheduled, that'll happen, and split it into useful oxygen. So if Moxie works, that would be one of the potential sources for oxygen for humans living, for human habitats. So yeah, there's all of these different technologies that have to be tested, and even if they are not tested, like Perseverance, of course, because Moxie was started being developed much before Perseverance came into the picture. They were able to send it on Perseverance to test it out right now. But they have a lot of focus on different aspects of in situ research utilization of what different things can be built, which can be tested on Mars whenever humans are sent there with whatever resources they take with them. The initial plans are that resupply will have to be sent. So it will be very expensive, the first few human trips, where they will have to send these resupply missions with food resources and other resources that the astronauts would need. But eventually, yes, after those first couple of trips, I think the first astronauts, their job will be to initiate the process so that the future missions, 6 or 7 missions or 10 missions down the line, it could go towards a more self sustaining uh, habitat of people. And this is just NASA's side of the story. Now, when we talk about what SpaceX is doing and what these other companies are trying to do, along with SpaceX, eventually, I think the first human missions to Mars will be a huge collaboration between NASA and SpaceX and other industry partners, and internationally as well. And it has to be, it should work like that, because it makes our life easier. If you have different entities taking responsibility for different aspects of setting up humans on Mars, it makes the job more doable, I should say, and also feasible economically. It makes it more feasible too. So I am not aware of what are all the things SpaceX is looking at, because from my understanding, SpaceX is a cargo delivery company. I mean, it's a rocket company. Their job is to build the rocket ships or the spaceships that will deliver cargo or people to back into Mars. Uh, I'm not sure if they have any plans going on for technology development of what will happen when they land on Mars. From what I understand, SpaceX mostly depends on NASA and other companies to take that on their shoulders and develop those technologies. So you have you have some small startups now coming up. Most of the space companies that come up, they are either satellite technology or rocket launches. But there are some startups that are coming up that are more focused towards what are people going to do when they land. We are going to lead a ton of different things, and you cannot just leave it on NASA to develop all of those things. So there are there's an agriculture based company in Colorado that is trying to develop technologies the way you can which will enable astronauts to be able to grow food on the moon without using the use of the greenhouses and everything that we discussed previously. They're also testing out some new spacesuit designs and things like that. So they're looking into different things, and they have some NASA grants as well to develop these technologies. So it's very interesting. But we would definitely need more people to become interested in this and start following through either through research or excuse me, either with the startup culture becoming more involved in developing future space technologies for future human habitats to for this to become possible. So it's a growing trend around the world right now, and also here in North America. But yes, we have a long way to go.
You talked about collaborating and uh, people working together, and I think that's one of the beauties of working in space. Uh, and there are many examples like the ISS and the Artemis program, which are a great example of exactly that. And also the community being pro humanity and the whole concept of the overview effect. Uh, but there are also issues or issues that may arise in the future. So right now we have the space ownership law, but is that sufficient? What are your thoughts on when we start landing people on the surface of moon, for example, but we have different agencies? How do we work that? Have you thought about this?
So there's a whole section of space law, and this is international space law set up by, I think, the COSPAR group. Again, this is all the spacefaring nations that have set up some treaties, and the planetary protection aspect comes from that. They also have these understandings and written policies where no country is supposed to claim any planetary body as its own. I don't know how effective that's going to be, but oftentimes you see these laws being in place, but then nobody follows it. So it remains to be seen. And there's obviously an astrosociology aspect of all of this, where sociologists and lawyers and policymakers come together to come and discuss these aspects of space exploration, of how ownership is going to work in space. And I don't know how many definitive answers they have for us yet. But yeah, they definitely do not want uh, people to fight over land on Mars or on the moon and that sort of thing. And yes, and it may happen because, we are humans and we are flawed in that way. All of us don't have that thing about, oh yeah, I mean, I'm doing this for humanity. People, when they land or when they go for things, sometimes they're like, oh, I'm doing this for my country, or I'm doing this for my company, and that sort of thing. So yeah, my thoughts on this are really, I don't have any, or I don't really have an opinion, because I really haven't looked into this much. And my thoughts about space law are more aspirational, where I would ideally like to see countries and companies come together and build something for humanity, because India has so many strengths that may not be there in other agencies, or NASA has a lot of strengths that may not be present in, say, European Space Agency, or and now, of course, the UAE Space Agency with their Hope mission, they're interested in Mars too. So how we can, I think we can combine so many of the strengths from different parts of the world to really build a more humanitarian base on Mars for exploration and science. But those thoughts are just something that you'll probably hear academics and scientists or engineers talk about it, because we they say, okay, yeah, they don't really have a real sense of how things work in the real world. No, we do have a sense of how things work in the real world. That's why we don't want things politicized on another planet, because we know what Earth is and how politics works here, and how we don't want that. We don't want to carry that to other planets. But unfortunately, we still know, despite our best efforts, some of that will be carried over to other planets. So, like I said, there's COSPAR and there's space law and there's space policy, but I don't know how effective they are. I wish they were, and they have some really great views. I mean, they have these policies. That's the very reason why they're setting up these policies, so that we don't have wars being fought in outer space in the future. So, but yeah, it remains to be seen how things are going to play out.
Uh, According to you, what are some signs or technology that are yet to be investigated and can be possible in the next 5 to 10 years with respect to living in space and on the surface of other planetary bodies? Or in another way, what are some technologies that aspiring space entrepreneurs should look at?
Aspiring space entrepreneurs should look at. Um, I would say, since the way space entrepreneurship works is that you must have an earth-based application for your startup to be successful and be invested in. And one of the things that people are coming up with are more and more satellite-based technologies. And I feel like a lot of a large aspect of that is being covered in by SpaceX, at least in the US. But in other parts of the world, people are starting to look at this, where you can have internet based on satellite, and then if you want to provide internet services on the moon or on Mars. So they're starting to look into that aspect of things. And then, of course, there's something else coming up, which is beaming solar power from outer orbit onto the surface. Sometimes, because of cloud cover or whatever reasons, if solar panels are affected, then beaming that from low Earth orbit to the panels seems like a viable option to go. And that's something that's coming up as well in the US. And I'm not sure if it's still being explored in India, but I know that one of the space entrepreneurs in India was very interested in this, and he was involved in a startup that was doing this. So yeah, that's it's something very interesting. But I would suggest, like, my personal favorite would be the whole in situ research utilization thing, where if there's a way to develop different aspects of technology, say how to convert water or how to purify water, or um, say if you have access to the polar ice caps, basically how to produce water, say on Mars, where you have that scarcity there, and there's pockets of water in the soil in places. But yeah, how do you access it? How do you make it accessible? Say you have frozen ice in deep pockets of soil in the various locations, but how does that convert to water that's portable for people, or to be utilized for agriculture? So these are some of the technologies that are not yet developed, or you don't have any companies that are looking into it a lot. Maybe in stealth mode, then I wouldn't know. But for up and coming entrepreneurs, some of these things are really important to think about. If you can develop these things, they do have Earth applications. I don't know how, how I mean, and that's why you need more brains to think about this. People who are better in finance and strategy may be able to come up with these answers. Where how do you make this beneficial for Earth? I mean, there are places on Earth that require water. There are arid zones. There are people living where water is a very, very expensive resource for them. So, if some of these technologies could be developed for these areas, I believe they could potentially find a way for having an application on the moon or on Mars, maybe. And the same applies for food. And so some of these resources that people will absolutely require to stay alive are some things that space entrepreneurs can start exploring uh, amongst themselves and start coming up with plans which will be potentially beneficial for people in the future.
Can you talk about what you're currently working on, both in your career and in your life?
Oh, career and life. So they are the same thing, basically. I am. So right now, I'm just very focused on at my work, and this is postdoctoral work. So yeah, if you talk to any postdoc, they will tell you that they pretty much only do what their postdoc work is because it takes up all of their time. So, as a grad student and between starting grad school and postdoc, I did explore different projects and I was doing them at the same time. But it's become more difficult when you're working at a clinic because of just the nature of our work, because we work, the work we do here, it's for actual patients. And so, and then experiments take a long time, and we have to do multiple things, multiple techniques to explore or help develop therapeutics for some of these diseases. So yeah, that's basically my only work right now. And I'm like, I've taken a little bit of a break from doing any of the NASA associated projects for now. I will probably go back to that in the future. But right now, my work is focused around studying DNA repair and utilizing some of these model organisms in genetics. So we use a mice model, we use Drosophila, but then I also work with cell lines, which are derived from patients, so primary cell lines, mammalian cell lines. And another way we explore that is if we get biopsies from patients, we actually grow organoids, something that's basically just a complex tissue culture which mimics the organ that we are working on where the disease is, so that we can develop different therapeutic solutions. So we grow those in the lab in a culture room and test either different drugs on them to see how it's shaping up or how it's behaving, or if we are trying to answer some questions, okay, why does this happen or how does this occur, and get data on that. So I utilize all of these tools to yeah basically. So my work right now is focused more towards Crohn's disease patients and colon cancer patients, and and basically irritable bowel disease as well. So those are the patients that we focus on in our department.
Can you name some books that you value?
Some books that I value: Harry Potter, the huge played a huge role in my life. Those are my favorite books. Yeah, currently I used to read a lot, but yeah, after a while, there's just so many papers to read that now I have switched over to listening to audiobooks. So I'm currently listening to Think Again by Adam Grant, which I'm finding it's really fascinating. I have read some of his other books. I think the last book of Adam Grant that I read was Originals, where he talked about how original thinking is so required in our world, and how original thinkers work, people who bring the original ideas to the table, how they function and how they go about getting their ideas from just a thought in their head to materializing it and making it a viable project. Um, Another really good book I enjoyed a very short while ago was Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus and Sapiens, which is the history of humankind. And then where humanity is headed, that's what he talked about in Homo Deus. I really enjoyed those two books. Um, then I think I read Deep Work by Cal Newport, which I really required at the time. This was how to turn myself off from social media and all these emails and distractions, and then just focus on producing good work, because you need that time alone to yourself if you want to produce original work and original ideas that can potentially benefit us or solve problems. You need that time to deep work. And I think that book really gave me some good pointers. So I've started listening to Cal Newport. He's a professor here at this university, I think Georgetown University in DC. And he also has a podcast, which my friend recommended. So I started listening to his podcasts to get some pointers from there. And that really helped me. So now I'm like, I don't have a tweet. Like if you go on my Twitter page, there's basically no tweets. I used to be very different. As a grad student, I was tweeting about everything and everything that's fascinating, and how we are when we get introduced to these sites. And I'm basically off Facebook. So, and I'm on no other. Yeah, LinkedIn is of course important because it's for professional reasons, but I don't really make posts there. So yeah, just tuned off from like mostly I'm getting ideas how to just tune off, and now just focus on getting things done, because I feel like I'm at the stage of life where I kind of have an idea where I'm going, as opposed to when I was excited about 10 different things and I wanted to go in all those 10 different directions. But then I made myself overworked. And then that's when I decided eventually, okay, I need to dumb down and focus on one aspect, and really utilize all of these different skills that I've gained over the years, and focus on some deep work. So that's what the help Cal Newport's book I would definitely recommend reading. And then I really enjoyed something by Bernard Roth. And this is a professor at Stanford Design School, called The Achievement Habit. This is a book I read a few years ago, I think when it released, maybe in 2015. That is a book about, again, how people who are fascinated by several things, it is okay to do that. But then how do you go about becoming an achiever in your goals that you want to achieve, and how do you make it into a habit and not a one-time thing? So I think that book helped me a lot to basically discipline myself, because as a student who was excited about several things, were I really needed that discipline that I lacked, and I was just running wild and everything. Like as a grad student, I remember I presented at NASA conferences something on biosolar cells that I was very excited about. I was like, you could utilize proteins to develop solar cells, and they could be functional for deep space missions. And it was really well appreciated at the conference. But I wasn't directly working on it. I wanted to start working on it, but then I was also working on studying the microbiome from an asphalt lake. And then, yeah, for a while I was involved in my startup, which we co-founded out of grad school, which was towards cancer therapeutics. And that was an interesting protein design project, because we were targeting cancer cells with antibodies. And that was a really great experience that added on to my career. So yeah, it's like eventually I decided, I will have to stop overextending myself in all sorts of directions, and then find that focus. So I feel like as you get older, you get that wisdom eventually. And these are some of the books that helped me shape that.
Uh, what about in life? What are some values in life that you think are important?
Um, I guess staying grounded and not overestimating myself. And this is these may be the things that I may have done in the past, but being real and being humble about, no matter where you go, remember your values. And I think, you know keeping keeping a good view of where my roots are. I always, no matter where I go, which country I live in, or wherever I work, those are they may be fancy places, but I remind myself what were the things my parents taught me. No matter what you do it for the benefit of humankind and humans. And the small town values, basically, I should say small town values that we have in India, but that would be unfair because those are values that people learn everywhere, uh, of staying grounded, staying humble, staying true to your roots, not forgetting those, not being, overpowered by the fascinating things you see in life and some of the amazing things that may sometimes be very overwhelming. But remember what's important to you, and not being seduced by things that may look very fancy but may not be real. You know what I mean? So yeah, those are some of the values that I still carry with myself, the things that I learned from my parents, of course.
Uh, Finally, where can people find out more about you and connect to you?
Connect with me. Okay, so well, you connected with me on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Yeah, those are the places. I mean, I still, people still connect with me on Twitter. I do have a Twitter account, mostly for research purposes, and sometimes when I find something is very compelling, then I just share it. But yeah, those right now, those are the two places I connect with people. Like I said, I have tried to tone it down. I still advise people on, because I'm associated with Blue Marble Space. So yes, I still help. I do still help out students when they reach out to ask questions about how they can have a career in planetary sciences or astrobiology, and whether they are going in the right direction and that sort of thing. So that's just something I do on my free time. I just help students out, because I know when I was a student, I didn't have anyone to answer those questions for me. So it's really important uh, for me to be able to help others make sense of what they're doing and how to go about it if I can. So yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter are the two places where I connect with people.
Afshin, thank you for this opportunity. Space and space science technology are some of my favorite topics to talk about. So it was really nice speaking to you, and thank you for spending your early morning talking about science. This was really fun.
Of course, it was fun for me too. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I hope your listeners would enjoy this.
Yeah, I hope so too. I really have fun.
All right. Thank you very much, Nathan.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye bye.